On today's episode of Patriarch Hour, Noah will be interviewing Dr. Edward Dutton, also known on YouTube as the Jolly Heretic. Dr. Dutton is an English anthropologist who teaches at a Finnish university as an adjunct professor. He has a degree in theology from Durham University and a PhD in religious studies from the University of Aberdeen. Dutton is the author or co-author of 13 books and is known for his work on human intelligence, such as the study he co-authored with Richard Lynn concluding that physical scientists are more intelligent than social scientists. As ever, our discussion today is on patriarchy, and we begin by discussing the differences between the Islamic patriarchy and the Western patriarchy. Enjoy the show.
No one's going to remember the incrementalists or will care about anything they ever did. Well, except to the extent that people like me or Michael Woodley or other colleagues of mine might cite them because they do some minor contribution. But they don't dare to see the wood for the trees. That's they must force themselves not to. I can't remember who it was that said it was somebody tweeted about this the other day that it's very difficult if to understand the nature of the world if your salary and payment depends on you not doing that. There is a degree to which we're in sort of almost a war, really, in Europe, and we're going to lose unless the values of the people that we're fighting against are values we adopt more.
Men who instinctively take personal responsibility for themselves and their families eventually realize that being atomized, rootless cosmopolitans inhibits their ability to exercise their willpower. Male agency naturally leads into the creation of a patriarchy. Raise your sons to be strong, masculine and dominant. Raise your daughters to be soft, feminine and submissive. The bad behavior that we see from women today is simply a rebellion against men's failure to benevolently dominate them. The failure of Western society is a failure to maintain the patriarchy.
Right, so you ask about the difference between Islamic patriarchy and European patriarchy, and I think the difference has to be understood in terms of the nature of the ecology that has been the ecology to which Islam has become dominant and the ecology in which Europe has become dominant. They are different ecologies. So we can conceive of, there's a notion in evolutionary science, we talk about fast and slow life history strategy. So a fast life history strategy is basically live fast, die young. Under such an ecology, it's an unpredictable ecology, but it's an easy ecology. What this means is that you can be wiped out at any minute, consequent by unpredictable diseases or whatever it happens to be, or war or fat, whatever. And so consequently you need to live fast, die young. You invest relatively little in your sexual partners. You invest very little in your offspring. They don't expect you to engage in a great deal of investment because it might not pay off. And so there's this situation doing fast and dying young. Now once this changes, once the environment becomes more harsh and more predictable, then the whole nature of the people starts to change, and the whole nature of their religiousness starts to change, because suddenly there is a payoff for investment. And if the carrying capacity of the ecology for the particular species is reached, and once that occurs, the members of the species start to compete with each other. In that ecology, if you simply have lots of sex with lots of people and hope that some children will survive, they could all die as a consequence of the harsh winter or whatever to which they're not adapted, and to which they don't know about, haven't learnt about. And so life slows down, childhood becomes longer. You need to learn more, and you need to be able to be more adapted to the ecology. Now, once this happens, then of course there's a benefit in sexual selection for females, not merely to select for a man who has good genes and will ensure that their children have good genes and will survive and whatever, but also that the man will invest in them. He will invest in the offspring. He will invest in them. He will invest in the offspring. This will elevate the probability of them surviving. And so then, of course, you get this model. The man therefore has the potential for his investment to be wasted. He has the potential for cuckoldry, and once that happens, you get mate guarding, and that's the beginning of patriarchy. Because once you get mate guard, now the question is how much trust is there in the society? How stable is the society? And therefore, how much mate guarding is needed? So once you end up with this system, if you have a society which is relative to another society, an easier ecology in which basic needs are met to a greater extent, and an ecology which is less stable than the other ecology, then that faster life history strategy ecology, where you're more likely to be able to live fast and die young, there will be less selection in that ecology for groups which are highly internally cooperative, highly rule following, and whatever. There will be less pressure on people to be like that. There will be less need to invest your bioenergetic resources in a large brain where you're high in intelligence, and as a consequence of being high in intelligence, you are more trusting, you are more empathetic, you are more pro-social, to some extent more rule following, and there'll be less need to invest in a brain where you could subtly get on with people and whatever, because the environment is easier, and so these things are less important. They are selected for to a lesser extent than they would be in a harsher and more stable ecology. And what religions tend to do is they tend to promote as the will of God that which is adaptive. You see this again and again and again, and that's why you get these variations in religiousness. If you look at the religion of the Yanomamo in Venezuela, the guy that did the study on them, Napoleon Chagnon, has recently died. And he got into all kinds of trouble because of the way that he presented them as the reality that they are. In an ecology like that, it's unstable, and therefore, to a great extent, you need to be quite violent. And the religiousness of the Yanomamo promotes this as being what the gods do, and therefore, or what the spirits do, and therefore what you should do. Whereas if you move away from that towards more developed, more stable ecologies, then you get God. You get these ecologies that are bigger and bigger and bigger. People are less genetically related. They need to be able to get on. And so you get the development of these big gods, these moral gods who are highly morally concerned and who want you to behave in a pro-social way to even your non-relatives, to even people that aren't in the tribe. And this helps to create a more complex society which can dominate. So that has, when we talk about the differences between Islam and Christianity and patriarchy, that's, I think, the key issue. Islam is a development to a less stable and to a less harsh ecology. Consequently, people are less worthy of trust. They are less agreeable, genetically likely to be. We've got good data on this actually now. I'm doing a book about it at the moment. They're lower in agreeableness. They're lower in conscientiousness. You can't trust them as much, and so mate guarding becomes more important. And so therefore you will get greater extremes of behavior that will be sanctified as the will of God, which will permit you to engage in this mate guarding, and therefore in that sense you get a much stronger patriarchy, and you get women's lives being much more restricted because you just can't trust people. People are more impulsive, people are more prone to violence. And so therefore you have to cut women, you get purdah, you get women being veiled, you get all the time, in some instances with only the eyes showing. In some parts of Afghanistan where it's extremely unstable, complete covering so that they don't provoke the sexual sexual feelings of single men. The lack of cooperation and the lack of group selection as well. Remember how important is the battle for group selection? Well, one thing that makes a group more internally cooperative and sort of more stable, more likely to win the battle for group selection, is that men aren't fighting as much. Men aren't jealous of each other. And one of the ways you can help to create that is through monotheism. Through monogamy. Through monogamy. And so monogamy will reduce intermale conflict because the percentage of the population who are these sort of incels, as it were, these ancient incels, is going to be much lower. The more unstable the ecology is, the less and the more easier it is, the less is the selection pressure, the less is the group selection. And so therefore at its extremes, if you look at something like the Bushman, the dominant male might have 5 wives, one of his lieutenants might have a couple of wives, and 60% of the men never have children at all. Now, there's an extent to which, with those single men, their energies can be sometimes marshaled into group-selected things, such as being a priest and inspiring the tribe, or fighting. but there's not much fighting actually with other tribes with the Bushmen, and so basically you just get this unstable society of jealous men getting into fights, and this
well, and in the ecology too of Europe, if you have a monogamous society, you have more men with skin in the game. Therefore, if your tribe has, not 80% or 70% of its men are in monogamous relationships, they have skin in the game to defend the tribe. Whereas if you have 2/3, they don't have a wife to lose. If someone's coming to attack, might as well run away. You're not going to lose anything.
That's yes. That's probably you could argue. If you look at Frank Salter's research, there's still a degree to which if you can pass your genes on directly by having a child, of course, but you can also do so indirectly by defending your family and defending your kin, and defending your extended genotype, which is what your ethnic group is. So, and it's very interesting that the way that they try to deal with this problem is by saying, well, if you lay down your life for Islam, then you go to heaven, and heaven is just a sex fest. If you're a male, that you get I can't remember how many, it's 77 virgins,
something like that.
And it's quite interesting that they realise that the problem, you'll get a permanent erection and 77 virgins, and they realise that the problem here is that the sex ratio is slightly higher to male to female, but there won't be enough Muslim women in heaven for them to have sex with, and so consequently, most of these 77 virgins are brought up from hell. That's stated in the I think it might even be in the Quran, but certainly in the Hadith. And so it needs to be more patriarchal, basically more extreme, and so therefore you end up honor killing, and in the most extreme that you get, of course, is in terms of mate guarding, well, and family honor guarding, which is also an evolutionary matter, but is what you see in Somalia and in certain other countries in Africa, in North Africa, like Egypt, where they have female circumcision, and then there's differences in this. So in Egypt or whatever, they'll just cut off part of the labia. Which means that the girl, I can't remember what the statistics are, I think it's 86% of Egyptians between the age of 15 and 49 have been circumcised. And it's higher in southern Egypt, which is poorer. I did a paper on Egypt and Egyptian IQ. And in Somalia, the tendency, at least in the southern poor part of Somalia, where Mogadishu is again, it's very high. It might be as much as 90% or something like that, or 95% are cut. And they cut off the outer labia, and then they sew it up. They sew the vagina up into an organic chastity belt with a little hole in it to urinate through. So that can be seen as the most. So they're basically impossible to rape without ripping open their chastity belt. So it's this difference in the extremeness of the patriarchy. And they've done various things to deal with the lack of trust problem in Islam. One of them is cousin marriage, and so obviously if you're married to your cousin, then it means that even if you are cuckolded, there's a degree to which it doesn't matter because you're strongly related to everybody anyway. So it reduces the gene pool, and in that sense, it means that, as you said earlier, even these men that don't have children have got skin in the game because the gene pool is heavily canalized and reduced, but it means they can't, of course, build up a big society or whatever because they're all fighting each other in these clans. So that's one way they deal with it is cousin marriage. Others, of course, is purdah, extreme purdah. But I think that's the key difference there.
Now, I think in the last 200 years or so, we have done a lot to change the environment of the West. It wasn't that long ago, maybe 75 years ago in Portugal, where I live, they still had malaria problems. And we've drained the swamps. We've made the ecology more stable. And at the same time, governments became larger and more stable, and there became a higher level of trust. And that may be part of why in the West, the harshness of the patriarchy went down. Where I live, it was only about 40 years ago, women still had to ask their husband for permission to get a passport.
Is that right? I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I know that in Sicily, the level of cousin marriage was extremely high as recently as the 60s, possibly something like half.
Yes.
Which might...
It's very common in Southern Europe. A lot of cousin marriage, people getting married very young. And a lot of that was to do to people not leaving their village or not wanting to leave their village.
They're not leaving their village, but it also implies a lack of generalized trust. Mm-hmm. So I think that's the crucial thing again with these Islamic societies. The high level of cousin marriage is is evidence of a lack of trust. And therefore, because they have this lack of trust, as expressed in that way, you would expect purdah to be particularly, patriarchy basically, to be particularly pronounced because of this lack of trust. Whereas this lack of, they're not genetically selected to the same extent we are for A, intelligence, which correlates with trust, and B, simply for these personality characteristics that predict trust. So, and I think that's the key, the key thing. So, cousin marriage was quite high historically in England, yeah, but over in the 16th century, for example, we know of it. But society, it was under harsh Darwinian selection until about 1800, until the time of the Industrial Revolution. And what we were selecting for, it seems, was firstly intelligence, which is going to elevate trust. Secondly, what's called the general factor of personality, so in particular, pro-social personality, which is going to elevate trust. And thirdly, religiousness was being selected for. And we know that's about 0.4 heritable. It's associated with fertility. It lights up certain parts of the hippocampus. It's definitely something that's on the selection, hippocampus, sorry. And so consequently, and that's associated with conscientiousness and agreeableness. Religiousness tends to promote those things, partly because if you think that there's a God sitting on your shoulder telling you to be good, then you're more pro-social.
And the reality is, at the top of the patriarchy is generally a god.
Yes,
a male god.
That's right, a male god. That's a reflection of what's going on. It's a patriarchal society, and you have a male. Now that doesn't mean, of course, that you can't have a patriarchy. You get patriarchies that are sort of more or less overt. So you can think about someone like in Hinduism. Okay, yes, there is a male god. I mean, but there's also polytheism and whatever. And you can argue that in the Catholic Church, you have these de facto numerous gods. I think you could. I mean, people would balk at that perhaps where you live in Portugal, but I would suggest,
if you're a Hindu and you went to a Catholic church, you would think that Mary was one of the gods of Catholicism. That was how you would see it through your lens.
I've met Hindus who worship Jesus as one of their gods.
Mm-hmm.
They see no problem with that. But yes, so I don't think we should make too harsh and fast a distinction between monotheism and the male god, and these religions where there is a paganism or whatever. There always seems to be some kind of dominant male god. Even paganism, in like Finnish paganism, for example, you have Ukko, the sky god, the thunder god. You always seem to get a dominant male god. But it seems to be, there's an extremeness to it. I mean, for example, in Protestantism, females are completely removed from religiousness at the formal level. At the informal level, of course, there's nothing more powerful than the church ladies. They were in many ways the kind of social justice warrior screaming harpies of 150 years ago. And they were literally, because you'd get these spinsters. Did you know that until the 70s or 80s, religiousness is higher among women. And until the 70s or 80s, I forget when it changed, women were more politically conservative than men. And now in Western countries, they are more liberal than men. And this seems to be because women are more religious than men. And when the religiousness was, as it were, still a kind of remnant, fossilized, adaptive, evolutionary thing, because they are more religious and the religious told them to be conservative and anti-gay and whatever, then they were. And then more recently, once the religiousness has been infected and mutated by the modern leftism and so on, then religiousness is, in its dominant form, has now become highly liberal, and so therefore women have switched. It's very
and you can even see, for example, some echoes of the higher level of conservatism of women when you see some of the SJWs talking about wanting to end, we have to end sex workers, and we have to end this thing or that thing that they see as a sin. They've been redirected.
That's a very good point. I've seen men talk about that as well, though, who are SJWs. And I think Nigel Farage, he had a candidate in the UK Independence Party who was a former porn star or something. And this SJW SJW, who I'm sure would have incredibly hypocritical. I mean, maybe he was just looking for a fault. But it was very interesting that he highlighted this as a problem. And I said, "What's for God's sake? What are you? Are you a Cromwellian Puritan? I mean, why do you care?" But yes, you would expect this issue of sexual ethics to remain relevant to women. I mean, I did a paper a few years ago on one of the things that fascinated me. Why are you in Portugal, by the way? Do you have a Portuguese wife or something?
Yes, my wife's Portuguese.
Yeah, it's always the way. I don't know if you read my paper on this, but I was fascinated by the fact that my wife's Finnish, of course, and I was fascinated by the fact that in this country, if you see a Finnish foreign couple, the foreign man will always be from like Britain or America or maybe Germany, and the woman is Finnish. But if it's a Finnish man, then the foreign woman will be from Estonia, Russia, somewhere like that. And I thought, isn't that very interesting? Because if you think about it, women are evolved to a greater extent than men to sexually select for status. We know why that is. That's clear. Men can just pump and dump. They lose nothing from the sexual encounter. Women can lose something, so they're more concerned about the status of the male, or at least his potential to gain status. And aspects of status is nationality, because it relates to the ability to obtain resources and simply almost like a nobility, like almost being looked up to almost. And I thought, well, I wonder if that, I mean, I observe this, I wonder if it statistically is the case.
I wouldn't doubt it.
I proved it. So we got every multicultural marriage, between a Finn and a foreigner, that occurred in Finland between in the year 2013, and we ranked the countries for per capita income, and we found that yes, Finnish women on average are more likely to marry men from richer countries than Finland, and Finnish men are more likely to marry women from poorer countries than Finland. So it's entirely.
But the common theme is the women tried to marry up.
Women marry hypergamously, and it's very interesting that as a consequence of the situation now, not so much in Southern Europe, but in Scandinavia and England and Northern Europe, women are basically now more educated than men, because you have this head girl phenomenon of the woman will do very well. The whole education system has been altered with the dominance of women in education to reflect what women like. And so whereas it used to be a kind of a man risk-taking thing where the exam was at the end and you either passed it or you failed it, and that was in favor of men who can deal with stress better and who would
and very hierarchical, with a lot of older pupils teaching younger pupils, and very merit-based, whereas it's shifted over to a lot of making sure you feel good.
Right, well, yes, but certainly the modular thing and the idea of having to work hard throughout the year and all this kind of thing is very much more what I think girls would prefer. But anyway, and so you get this situation, and they're more higher in conscientiousness anyway than men, which predicts educational success. They're higher in agreeableness, which moderately predicts educational success, and they're higher in mental instability. And an optimum level of mental instability predicts educational success because it acts as an incentivizer. And so, and also they develop earlier as well. And so they have all of these things mentally. So they have all of these things in their favor. And so, of course, they're more educated now than men. And so then they, in a sense, they have equal status to men, if not in some cases in terms of doctorates in Finland these days higher. But yet they want to marry they want to marry up. There's no one for them to marry.
We've been reading recently that women complaining that they cannot find a man that earns sufficiently more than them for it to be one step up.
No, you always get this in American sort of sitcoms and stuff. In a way, because Americans are more overt and sort of vulgar about money than we are. That people will openly say, and maybe you could admire the openness, but openly say, of course, I want my husband to earn more than me. You know, it would be almost disgusting if my husband were not to earn more than me. You can get trade-offs, of course. I know many cases here where the woman is more educated, and she has a master's degree or something, and she's a teacher or she's an academic or something like that. But the husband earns more because he's a plumber, or they earn more than academics do.
Somebody that does something
that in the USA, but you would get that in Europe. But that's quite rare, and I think that's associated with women being a bit mentally unstable. So in general, they don't marry, and so they become lesbians. That's one thing that they seem to do. Female sexuality is about 20% genetic. Male is 0.2 heritable, and with men it's 0.4. And so consequently, the women who go to prison apparently become overwhelmingly prison gay, and you'd perhaps expect there to be this rise in. I've got some data on this, although I haven't published it yet, which indicates that there is a correlation between the degree to which women in a country are more educated than men and the percentage of lesbian adoption. Although I don't know if that's confounded by other things, such as those kinds of countries being more left-wing. And
well, it is interesting.
In Scandinavia, it was there.
It is interesting then that what we're doing is we're filtering out the highest IQ, probably the highest agency women out of the gene pool, which doesn't bode well for the average IQ of the nation if we're taking the people on the far right of the IQ bell curve and saying, here, get loads of education, work, don't have kids, and we're going to filter these people out of society. Wow. Whereas we used to, you tell a man who's intelligent to go to school and get a great job, historically that meant he'd have more children.
That's true. Until 1800, there was a positive association in England, certainly, between wealth and fertility. And at that time, wealth was this was intelligence. So basically, there was a positive association with intelligence. If you come across my book, At Our Wits' End, Why We're Becoming Less Intelligent and What It Means for the Future.
It's on my queue.
Michael, I'm sorry?
It's on my queue to read.
All right. By myself and Michael Woodley of Maneum, we show that we were becoming more intelligent until the Industrial Revolution. He's even got ancient genomes which show this was going on. And then since the Industrial Revolution, we have become less intelligent. And we have become less intelligent for genetic reasons. We know it's happening. There's research in Iceland that indicates that the percentage of the population that carry alleles that are associated with very high intelligence has declined between the 1920s and the present day. So this is happening for genetic reasons. Partly it's because when people become more comfortable and luxurious, it seems they just stop. They rationalize everything. They're less stressed. They're more able to rationalize things. They rationalize everything, including having children. And this seems to be what happened in ancient Rome. And it made, even though they didn't have much contraception there, and they imposed a tax on men that didn't have children, who had a certain level of wealth, but they paid the tax. And they would rather not have children. And so that's probably one reason why Rome and all civilizations decline. Then you get contraception, which was practiced in Islamic civilization, for example. That's more likely to be used by people that are better off because they have lower mortality salience, therefore are more efficiently used by people that are more intelligent, and so civilization collapses. And we've made it worse with feminism because, of course, feminism means that the more intelligent women will spend all of their 20s on their education and their careers and have a small number of families, a small number of generations as well, because they'll be starting their families at 40, whereas their low IQ equivalent would have started her family at 20 and be a grandmother at 40.
Yeah, so, I was telling my wife that she's 40, she's about to have twins in a few days, and I said we were saying to her that if this was 100 years ago, it'd be your daughter about to have twins, not you.
Congratulations! So you don't have any other children?
I have a 6-year-old, and we're about to have twins.
Okay, good. Yes, keep up the gene pool, the IQ gene pool, and all that. Right. So anyway, that's why I think that we've digressed slightly, but that's why I think that you have this difference in the nature of patriarchy. Anyway, it's to do with the ecological pressures.
And I think for the other thing that I was very interested in is talking a little bit about one of my friends was bringing up a very good point about why patriarchy versus matriarchy, and he was talking about Kohlberg's moral development stages and explaining how not only do men and women develop their moral compass at different speeds, but essentially, I don't know if you're familiar with that work.
Vaguely.
Okay, so essentially, there are stages of moral development, and women stop about halfway along the stage that men take. So we heard recently, their brain takes up to the age of 40 sometimes to finish developing. Mm-hmm. And that will be held out as, oh yeah, men are children until they're 40. That's of course the spin that the news media put on it. But the reality is that that meant that men had twice as long to develop their brain and their moral intuition than women had. So what it basically shows is 6 stages of moral development. And the findings were that women tended to stay at about the 3rd stage in general. Mm-hmm. And so what happens is, well, the girls are concerned with what's fair. The men are concerned with what's right, what is justice. Whereas the women are concerned with what is fair to them, that's justice. And it gives a patriarchal society a much higher success rate when it's facing adversity. A group that's facing adversity and is focused on the right, the true, and logic is going to do much better. And when society,
I don't know if we need to reduce it to this Holmberg thing. I mean, it just strikes me that if you look at Baron Cohen and his idea of the male, autistic male brain, the male brain is focused on systematizing, the female brain is focused on empathy, and so if you are focused on empathy and creating an equal society and whatever, if that's the dominant thing, then you're not going to create things, because the creating things and thus developing in the battle of group selection, having better weapons and things like that, it always rocks the boat. It always annoys people. It always irritates vested interests. And so if all you're interested in is everyone getting along, then the tendency is for everything to stay the same. That societies that want everyone to get along, you do get some societies like this that are focused on things like national happiness, like in Bhutan. They tend to be extremely conservative. Japan and China, without the influence from the West, they're very focused on everyone getting along for good reasons, because it's a highly group-selected ecology and a very harsh ecology, and there's a strong, therefore, degree to which what's very, very important is these groups where they're internally cooperative and everyone gets along, and so you can survive. But it does mean that the gene pool is very small, and it means that you don't get much in the way of inventiveness. So I've done papers on this with a Japanese colleague. We've tried to understand. They have higher IQ than us, the Northeast Asians, about 6 points higher, but they have a level of per capita innovation that's on a level with countries that have an IQ of 90. What's going on? And what we found was, well, the essence of it's the genius. It's the genius that does things. What's the genius like? And the genius is basically a high IQ criminal. That's the way you can sum it up. He has outlier high IQ plus moderately antisocial personality. That's the genius. And that moderately antisocial personality means he's low in conscientiousness, so he thinks outside the box. He's not bound by rules and whatever. And he is low in agreeableness, which means that he either doesn't care about offending vested interests, or he is low in empathy and he couldn't conceive that he would offend people even if
finds joy in it.
Or perhaps even, yes, he's a contrarian and he quite likes doing that. Perhaps that's even so. And now, of course, these people are overwhelmingly male, because women are higher in conscientiousness than men, and they're higher in agreeableness. And if you look at the intelligence range, it's much narrower among women than among men. So men have more highly intelligent people who are these geniuses and so on, and who are running society and whatever, but they also have more men who are very low in intelligence and living on the streets and in prison and whatever. They have these extremes. Equally with the Northeast Asians, it seems there's some evidence their IQ is bunched, they have fewer IQ outliers, and obviously they have fewer psychopaths, fewer psychopathic traits. Smaller gene pool means these things are less likely to come up anyway, less likely to combine. And so you can regard Europe as a Goldilocks zone for genius, where too much of these kinds of people in the society will be unstable, people won't be able to cooperate, people won't get on, everything will just collapse, and also the intelligence will be too low as a whole to get big things done. And you get somewhere like India, you get some very intelligent people in India, but the average IQ is so low, and the range of personality in that sense is, there's just not enough intelligent people to have genius there.
The smart people they have are too busy taking care of the other rest of the people.
That's probably are too busy making sure their computers don't crash or whatever to actually get the analysis done. And so you need this and there's too much in the way perhaps of not so much psychopathology, but yet it's low intelligence is the problem there. Africa is a better example. Psychopathology very high, intelligence very low. So you've got these genius characteristics, but you're not going to find them in combination with high intelligence because the ecology is so easy. So there's this optimum zone where you're going to get genius, and that's going to be Europe, and equally, and particularly Northern Europe, and equally then if you where intelligence is higher than Southern Europe, and equally if you look at we've done studies on. I had one study that was summarized as no balls, no Nobel. What we found was that if you get all societies that have ever won a Nobel Science Prizes, and you control for IQ, so you just use societies with IQ above 90, then national per capita markers of testosterone predicts national per capita IQ achievement. So the societies.
And it would be interesting because a high IQ is often associated with being more contrarian. So those random geniuses, they get this combination of the high IQ and probably high testosterone as well to make them aggressive enough.
I think it's outlier high IQ that's associated with being contrarian. I'm not sure it's IQ.
Okay. Yes.
I think outlier high IQ. Yeah. So it is men who are going to be the engine of any kind of progress. And so it's a terrible situation where at the environmental level, men are denigrated. Geniuses have a problem now as well in universities. Universities are increasingly taken over by women, and they reflect because of these head girl types that do well at school and whatever and go to university. And then they create a situation conducive to females, which is a situation where everything's incremental and where there's constant assessment, where the box is a tick and you're told, oh, you're a good girl, you've published 2 papers in a peer-reviewed journal this year, good girl, have a sweetie, and everything's cooperative, and it's groups of scientists working together, and you have to have research groups, and you have to be able to fill out lots of forms and obtain funding and do all the things that girls like. And these things are anathema to geniuses. Geniuses are manly men with very high IQ. That's what they are.
100 years ago, there's a little more than 100 years ago, you still had duels at the big British universities. Life and death duels.
Yes, you know? I think we banned dueling in the early 1820s, I think it might have been.
Technically it was banned. It was so instilled in middle-class culture,
or upper-class culture, that it carried on for... And there was a case in Scotland in the 1820s, I think it was. It was a duel by shooting. And the guy in question, he'd never shot a gun before, and he was up against someone that used to be a soldier, and he just shot him dead. And it was the jury were so of the view that this was acceptable that he was found not guilty, even though, I think that's right, even though he was obviously guilty. It's known as Britain's last duel. I think it was about 1829 or something. Yeah, you have that culture, and you can argue that the culture of academia to some extent can be regarded as, yes, cooperation, helping, whatever, but there's also an adversarial element to it. You have to be able to pull people apart. You should be able to. That's what an academic disputation is about. And I know of male academics who've done this, let's say at we call a viva, like a PhD defense, and it reduces the female out to tears.
Yeah.
And the attitude is, well, how can you be so mean? You know, she's worked so hard on this. In Finland, for example, they have this thing called a PhD defense. Then afterwards, they have a karonka. So the PhD defense is supposed to be a formality, really. And they have this detailed defense where it's all very formal, wearing top hats and stuff. And they have the opponent, and you have the PhD presents the PhD, the person critiques it. And then they immediately go off and have this party. And I had an English friend who was an academic at Oulu in the English department. And the first time he was asked to do one, it might have been in Sweden rather than Finland. But anyway, of course, he pulled it apart. And he thought it was rubbish. And he pulled it to bits, and then he was kind of almost taken aside and told that this isn't how we kind of do it.
Yeah, we're not actually critiquing, we're only pretending to critique.
Yeah, whereas the English system is more in the sense that you can pass or fail depending on how your viva goes, but it's not a public thing, it's done in private.
But that competition, you see, this is something that it's very difficult for women to understand. When I speak with women about competition, they almost have a universally negative view of it. When I speak about competition with men, it will depend. If I'm talking to a masculine man, a successful man, he's all pro-competition. And if I'm talking to a man who's generally unsuccessful in life, he will be very anti-competition. Yeah,
I mean, this thing at the moment, this Extinction Rebellion, it can be regarded, they're pro-equality. They don't want competition. Indeed, further than that, there's a kind of religious cult. I've just done a video on this guilt trip thing. It's a kind of a modern-day atheistic form of Christianity, really, whereby we're all sinful, and we can atone for the sin that's highlighted is destroying the earth through climate change, but there's loads of others. We can atone for this by wearing sackcloth and ashes and reducing our standard of living, while concomitantly allow what they call it climate justice, allowing third world countries, to which we've given the Industrial Revolution and low child mortality, but never mind, atoning for what we've done there by letting them kind of get to the same level of us. So it's kind of an equalizing movement.
Not because we're pushing them up, but because we're going to push ourselves
down, yeah, and let them go up a little bit, but basically push ourselves down so they can go up, and as a consequence, stop eating meat and eat babies, eggs or whatever the hell.
Eat baby bugs.
Like rabbits eating their own excreta. And then then that's the kingdom of God on earth. I think there's a level of Edward Bailey was a theologian. He called it implicit religion. I think there's a level on which that's what's going on, and it's attractive more so to females. I think because of the equality dimension, it's attractive to middle class females, middle class educated women. That's a lot of who you see there, educated people, white people, because I think we have been under Darwinian selection for less time than ethnic minorities. And so therefore we have had this build-up of spiteful mutations that would have been washed out under Darwinian conditions because there was 40% child mortality and these maladaptations of the body, which would have meant poor immune system and got you killed, that you wouldn't live. They tend to be comorbid with maladaptations of the mind. This is my colleague Michael Woodley's model. It's called the social epistasis amplification model, because the mind's 84% of the genome, so it's a massive target for mutation. And so as mutation of the body builds up and you get more and more people with all kinds of these problems, and they need vaccines and whatever, you're going to get more mutations of the mind, and you're going to get these spiteful mutants who are going to advocate these things that have got them and their group destroyed under Darwinian conditions. Atheism, so you don't think your life has meaning. Low ethnocentrism, so you help other ethnic groups ahead of your own. Antinatalism, and all this sort of, just everything. They're going to they then take over institutions that have developed to promote to its highest possible level societal adaptation, such as the church, religiousness, or schools, or whatever, and undermine the utility of those. But secondly, they're going to induce those who don't carry the mutations, but who are very rule-following and prone to being hypnotized, i.e. women, but also cooperative people, to follow their way of thinking. And thirdly, they're going to advocate a way of thinking, i.e. generalized empathy or whatever, which moves away from the norm that we know from computer models gets you selected for the group level, which is high positive and negative ethnocentrism, that move away from that. And the middle class will be more mutated because they've been under Darwinian selection for less time. They've had high child mortality for less time. So you're going to get they've had the selection collapsed first at the top of society, and we know that there was research by Gregory Clark, who's at University of California, Davis, in a book called The Sun Also Rises, and he shows that between about 1200 and he's based on names, 1200 and 1950, the heritability of social class in England was 0.7 across time. So there's basically social castes. And the middle class will be more kind of mutated and more left wing, and so I see it as a battle between two dimensions that hunter-gatherer groups have: equality desires, such that you you can create an ethnocentric group where everyone gets on, and status desires, dominance desires, such that you can move to the top of the hierarchy. Those are in tension, and the select group that will win in the battle of group selection will have the optimum balance in terms of percentage of the population with whatever facets. And the breakdown of Darwinian selection means that it just goes mad, and particularly there's this push towards equality, and also the liberation of women. And this is important, means that the society will inherently be less warlike, it will be less logical, it will be less scientifically sort of focused and focused purely on science. It will be less right-wing, ultimately, once religion breaks down. And so it will be less ethnocentric. And it will be outcompeted by a society that is optimally more patriarchal. And that's what we're seeing. And I think you see that even in something like, I don't know if it might even be the case that the Christianity of the time of the Crusades was more patriarchal than the dominant Islam that was practiced at the time. I don't know, but it may well be so. Because
the height of the British Empire in the 1880s, it was an extremely patriarchal culture. It treated women very, very well, but it was also very, very patriarchal.
Yes, we got
and I think that treating women well is that investment that case-selective investment in your offspring?
We were becoming more group-selected. We were becoming more religious. We were selecting for these things over time. We know that. And I wouldn't. Maybe someone should do a paper on this. Maybe I will. I wouldn't be at all surprised if we were selecting to be patriarchal to the optimum degree. I mean, we were becoming more patriarchal.
Well, I think that optimum balance between patriarchy and in-group trust, because such that we recognize investing in women is investing in our progeny.
Yes.
And I think there's a huge difference in the low in-group, the low trust societies where they're going for a quantity over quality, and so investing in care of women isn't as big a priority for them. More women is more important than taking better care of the women you have. And so you'll see, Islamic expansionism often included the capture of foreign women as well to boost the number of women they had. And that wasn't really a thing very much in Western patriarchy. It was more take really good care of the women.
So if you're legally only allowed to have one woman, and perhaps in Tudor England, I mean, there was de facto polygamy in the sense that often the
or France, where it's always been going on for the elites.
Yeah, it was acceptable for them to have mistresses. But in general, yeah, you've got to invest in this wife and make sure she survives. It incentivizes you to do so more if you only have one. So it does become a matter of quality. That's true. Whereas if you have multiple wives, you're hedging your bets, and so obviously you've got to spread your. It's like spread betting. You've got to spread your resources more widely.
And if you have a woman that you protect from trauma, either caused by other men or caused by you or caused by her family, if you're protecting women from trauma, they will be better mothers. They'll raise stronger sons and daughters who will then make a stronger society.
I'm doing a book on Islam at the moment, actually, and I argue in that the trauma as well of genital mutilation is going to make them worse mothers, and I look at the data on that. I've got a book coming on Islam, probably at the end of the year, which look at patriarchy and whatever. But I think that's true. So the decline in patriarchy. Well, on the other hand, though, mate guarding is rendered more easy in more complex societies in some ways because of better law and order and other factors which preclude your wife getting raped.
Until recently, it was illegal to commit adultery in the West, but things were handled in a different way. It can be illegal in Muslim countries, but because there's no high trust, you can't be sure what's going to happen with a court system. Whereas in the West, everything functioned according to rules. And so when everything's functioning according to rules, people start behaving.
This is one thing I think is relevant with Brexit as well, which is that the attitude of the males, the more male way of thinking, which is the more Conservative Party way of thinking, is these are the rules and this is it. So it's a kind of positivist way of thinking. Now, that in English law and therefore in American law, any legal system, there's always a tension between positivism and idealism. And the way that they dealt with it was and it was a female who was the dominant judge, of course, this Lady Hale, was just absolute idealism, was by saying, well, whatever, you may have been abiding by the letter of the law, but who cares? The spirit of the law, the idealism, is this, and that was their finding. Now, another way of doing it, the positivist way of doing it, is to say the Queen is in charge of England, that is the law. The Queen prorogues Parliament on the advice of her ministers. The Queen did so, and the Queen's beyond reproach. End of. That's. And
if you don't like it, change the rule. Don't change the ruling.
Don't just say, oh well, no, but we have this ideal of fairness and of you're not being fair. You're not being fair.
But you have to see it. It comes for the difference between men and women, and that comes to some extent, I believe, from the fact that the current system of law and order exists because a large number of men were willing to kill everybody who disagreed with them, or die themselves in the process. And so they had a lot of stake in it. There's a lot of skin in that game. And that even gets transcended through the generations where, we created this by the skin of our teeth.
Yes.
Whereas women kind of inherited it. So they can change it. They can manipulate it or like a friend of mine, Kurt Doolittle he says men are physical super predators. Women are social super predators.
Well, it's true. I don't think we should downplay what we might call soft power. So I think women have had influence in history that we might not even know their names, but they've definitely had it by manipulating men.
Yes.
I don't think that it's entirely true to say that they've merely inherited it and they've had no say in it. But certainly, I think I would go back to this issue of patriarchy over time. It does seem to get more pronounced over time. In Anglo-Saxon England, for example, you didn't have witchcraft wasn't illegal. So witchcraft, which can be regarded as a challenge to the patriarchy, a kind of alternative woman religion in some ways, I did a video on witches, is not illegal. It becomes illegal a bit later, kind of 1500s, and then it becomes a death sentence. And then you get, by the 1600s, we're getting more, and you have these witch crazes and whatever, where they're kind of purged from the society and then hanged and whatever. And then we get, but even at that time, how women are dressing, you have sort of cleavage showing and things like this. And then if you go up to the Victorian era, they're completely covered up. It's basically more protection of women, more patriarchal. And this seems to reach a turning point, and then you get the rise of. Interestingly, with the rise of feminism, I wonder if that's again spiteful mutants and whatever. There was what was the year 1880 or something? There were far more women than men over the age of 45. You had this large number of, because men would die in accidents or go to the empire or delay marriage or whatever. And so you had this massive excess of women, these spinsters, who would become religious and be involved in the church as a set of sort of groups selected. But they'd often, of course, be physically unattractive. They'd be the women men didn't want. And then they were the very women that started the feminist movement, started this really kind of societally dysgenic movement, which has meant that we're less patriarchal and thus therefore we're being dominated by Islam, which is more so. So I wonder if that's
one of the theories that I put forward is that the genesis of the feminist movement in the UK and in the United States, and I'm actually Canadian, but in the United States are separate genesis, and that in the United States it had a lot to do with men abdicating their responsibility in the patriarchy. A lot of men choosing to, liquor went from being a luxury item to being dirt cheap, and they spent all their time drinking. A lot of men would spend too much time drinking and doing other things, and women, with their ever seeking of stability, started to say, and it was mostly those spinster type women started to say, we feel unsafe in this environment, and we will seek political power for the movement where they wanted them to outlaw alcohol, the prohibition movement, and that then morphed into feminism in the US.
On the other hand, it could be that women are simply more religious than men, and a way of attaining status in the context of this religious arms race was prohibition. Mm-hmm. And you had a prohibition movement in England as well in the 19th century. I think it probably took off more in America. I guess it's again something I did a video on the Jolly Heretic. Americans are just more religious than English people. I mean, if we talk about the core America people, they are descended from very, very religious English people who colonized Jamestown and places like, they colonized Massachusetts and places like this. Then you have the mercantile, not so religious people that go to the South, but they were under all kinds of problems with slavery and would have perhaps elevated religiousness, and under possibly greater selection pressure as well in some ways. And then you had the Ulster Scots, who were extremely religious, that then came to, I think that was the South? It's South Carolina, places like this.
Scots went a lot into the Appalachian areas.
Yeah, and the Ulster Scots, Scots.
Oh, okay.
The Northern Irish. And so you have this core, very religious society. Religiousness anyway is a correlate of immigration. People that migrate tend to be more religious. Australia seems to be more religious than England, for example. So you're just more religious, and so things are pushed further, and you end up in, was it 1920? Was it with prohibition? Was it 10 years or so?
Yeah, it was just right after the First World War and lasted into the early 30s, I think.
That's right. That's right. When Churchill was in America in New York in about 1930 or 30 or something like that, and he fell over and he was in a car accident, and he was an alcoholic, of course. The doctor was so concerned that he'd have an alcoholic of course, a fit essentially.
Yeah, I think he had a special prescription. For his medicinal alcohol.
Medicinal alcohol with breakfast, lunch, and dinner.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they were concerned that he'd have a fit. So I think basically, there's a very good paper on it that I looked at in my video on patriarchy. I always forget the name of it. These two women, very brave women, sociologists, Montrose and something or other, and they call it "It's a Man's World" is the name of the paper in Mankind Quarterly. It's a journal I edit. Excellent paper, and they were the ones that kind of inspired me to look into this more. And they basically it's women that have created. So it's men that have created. It's women that have created patriarchy. That's their point. Ironically, you could argue it's men that have created feminism, but by virtue of the Industrial Revolution and the reduction in extrinsic mortality and the rise of genetic mutation and all this sort of thing.
And to a large extent, men tolerating it. A lot of men will come to me and say, women do this and women do that. And I'm like, well, don't tolerate it.
Yeah, but the men are part of this discourse where you elevate status by coming across as nice and kind and whatever. And so just to stand there openly and argue women shouldn't be allowed to vote because the result is inherently left-wing governments that will open up the country to invasion or that kind of argument is so unnecessary.
Women in public will tell you that they absolutely hate your opinion and find you disgusting, and then they will send you naked pictures. This is what happens because deep down inside, they don't like nice men. They like strong men. Well, hopefully those are good men as well.
Preferably strong and nice men, but yes.
Yeah. I wouldn't say nice. I would say good. Well, I'm thinking of nice in the no more Mr. Nice Guy terminology.
You're thinking of nice in the kind of loser sort of.
Yeah, the kind of deceptively nice to the harmless nice.
Yes, the harmless man. No, they don't find that person attractive.
No, I had a female client today tell me she's very young, so she just started really looking for a long-term partner. And she's saying, what is it with guys? They're like, guys my own age are a bunch of children. She says, they want a mother. They don't want a woman. And she says, I want the men to be more decisive and take more control.
One of the reasons for that is that if she's 20 or however old she is, quite young, then those men have been raised almost completely by women.
Yes.
And therefore have been used to a situation where everyone gets medals for taking part and nobody loses and nobody's feelings are hurt.
And you get punished for showing too much what you can do. If you can beat the other team by 20 points, you don't. You beat them by 2 because you've got to be nice to them.
There's that. I mean, I know the situation in Finland is quite appalling. You get all the teachers are women. There's no discipline in the classrooms, and you get all these children who in days of old they'd just be boys. They're boys being boys, and they need order and structure and discipline as they are evolved to have. And it's not there, and so they start diagnosing them with ADHD or autism or whatever, defiant disorder, whatever it happens. They're simply boys that are evolved to a certain ecology, a certain system, and that has been taken away. That has collapsed.
Boys don't really listen to women. My son, my wife's trying to get my son to do something, and he's not listening. And I'm in another room, and I go, Levi, listen up. I had to immediately in the other room, he snaps to attention and starts doing the thing. I don't have to get on my chair, nothing. It's just that he knows Dad's voice means actually get it done. I can probably push Mom a bit.
Yes, and I found when I'm on various occasions, I've been alone with my kids because my wife has got away somewhere on work thing, or I take them to England, just me. I don't have any problems with behaviour when it's just me. Maybe she has the same and I'm not there because there's nobody else to appeal to or something like that. But I don't know. I've had to show Finnish teachers how to speak to my children if they want to get things done. That's what they want. If they want multiculturalism and so on. Well, I'm afraid what multiculturalism means is that not everyone's Finnish. And Finnish people are very genetically and naturally cooperative and high in agreeableness and conscientiousness. I'm afraid English people are less so. And lots of people, and the education system here, even more so than England, is so dominated by women, and also the medical profession as well.
Fathers that like you and like me who raise our children to not be this easily moldable, our children will be the ones that are those genius outsiders that actually accomplish things that we mentioned before. And it is going to be tough on our kids, because we're doing something a little bit different than other people, but it will also be better for them because we're raising them in, you know, I say to people,
well, they're more case selected. I mean,
we're raising our kids, you know, I don't know if you have boys or girls. I'm raising my sons to be men, real men.
A case-selected environment is an environment that is harsh yet predictable. That is,
Yes.
I'm not saying I'm harsh, but that is a case-selected environment. And I don't know if you've come across my book, Churchill's Headmaster, The Sadist Nearly Saved the British Empire, and I look in detail at the English public school system. And what you've got is these very wealthy children, and because they're very wealthy, they've never wanted for anything. And those children are going to have to run the empire. So their life could, if nothing were done about it, be utterly decadent, i.e. it could be predictable and not harsh at all, easy. And that would just create a decadence. That's what we have now, a predictable yet easy life in which there's no mortality salience, nobody has to worry about anything, really, compared to what it was like a few generations ago, where people were worrying about whether there's food on the table. And what the public school system and the prep school system did was it created, rather like the Spartans did, really, a system that it was modelled on that for the upper class that was harsh yet predictable. And the evidence is that the best outcomes, there was a book on by Wilson and Herrnstein on this called, I forget what it was called, but the best outcomes in terms of children being adaptive is that their environment is harsh yet loving, which to a certain extent is the same as harsh yet predictable, to a certain extent.
My son loves it when I push him to do something that is difficult for him. I take him to the gym and I say, you know, pick up a couple of kettlebells, and I'm going to pick up some kettlebells too. And we're going to walk to the end of the gym and back. So halfway there, he says, it's starting to hurt, it's getting sore. And I'll say, take 3 more steps, turn around, we're going to walk with it back now.
I do.
And
I don't do that to my son, but I will be annoyed if he hasn't finished reading The Gay Science by Nietzsche by tomorrow, because he's 7 years old, but I think you can't start them too young.
No, it's good to push them in some way or the other. So I will push him that way. I will push him to take controlled risks. And the joy that he feels from success after being pushed hard like that, he doesn't hold, there's no grudge against me. There's no, you know, he can stop anytime he wants. But he understands that if he follows my instructions and does the hard thing till it's done, that he will get joy out of that. And that's building up in his brain the idea that doing something until it's done, and even when it's hard, is going to give you a sense of joy, a sense of accomplishment. Whereas nowadays it's easy, it's okay to give up, because you know you will make things easy enough that you never tested, and if you do happen to be tested, you can give up, and we'll let you try again and again and again until you succeed.
It'll be all right in the end. Yes, and even you get that, interestingly, when I was at school, you not only did exams become modular, they didn't used to be that you do a number of modules throughout your 2-year, what we call A-levels, which is the British school sort of leaving certificate. So they were modular, which appealed to girls. History wasn't modular. History was end of the year, you just do it. But I remember English and religious studies, which my other 2 A-levels, were modular. But also you could repeat the exam a number of times to try and get a better mark. So now that suited me in English, because I didn't do very well. I got a C on my first drama exam, and I repeated it, and then I got, not only did I get an A, but I got like 100% or something. But otherwise, it was a system of, it's okay, you know. So
don't worry, you can try again, dear.
You can keep going. Yeah, you can try again. You can. It'll be fine. And so, yeah, I think there are some things you could argue that perhaps. I mean, if I was 7 years old now, as a person who was born prematurely, I couldn't do PE very well, whatever. I'm sure I'd have had a much easier time because the teachers would have been micromanaging the behaviour of the pupils. But it wouldn't have prepared you for life, I think.
Yeah, an easy time doesn't prepare you for anything except for an easy life. And, well, maybe you get an easy life. Generally, we don't remember the people who had an easy life. We remember the people who took a harder path. You know, what you're doing, coming with information and papers that are controversial, is not easy, I'm sure.
No, and that's the thing. No one's going to remember the incrementalists or will care about anything they ever did. Well, except to the extent that people like me or Michael Woodley or other colleagues of mine might cite them, because they do some minor contribution, but they don't dare to see the wood for the trees. They almost force themselves not to. I can't remember who it was that said it was somebody tweeted about this the other day, that it's very difficult if to understand the nature of the world if your salary and payment depends on you not doing that.
Exactly.
There's some kind of quote to that effect, somebody said. So yeah, I mean, there's some things perhaps that are good about the development of female influence, but I think that in general, it's clear what's happening. And in terms of how many, they also tend to limit fertility. These, when they're in charge, women. So these matriarchal societies or not matriarchal, but matrilineal anyway. A society where females have quite a relative degree of power in southern China and places like this. They tend to have very low fertility. They tend to be very small societies, and they do very much. So the point is that there is a degree to which we're in sort of almost a war, really. In Europe, and we're going to lose unless the values of the people that we're fighting against are values we adopt more.
Mm-hmm. I spend a lot of time teaching men. I have both male and female clients, but I spend a lot of time teaching men about agency.
What do you do?
I'm a coach, so I teach people, for example, if they're looking to find a mate, I teach them how to do it. The things that our ancestors would have taught us several generations ago and that we're not getting nowadays in the way that we're raised. For a lot of men, they were raised without enough male influence. They haven't learned how to control their emotions, their thoughts, their feelings, and their actions, and their agency is low. So I spend quite a bit of time teaching men about agency. And from what I see, and this has to be a physical and mental process, you were mentioning the early or the Victorian British schools, and it wasn't intellectual only. It was a mix of intellectual and reinforced with physical training as well. And I think this is very, very important. You can change a man just by getting him physically fit. It changes his hormone profile, changes how he thinks, and it makes him more receptive then to ideas of personal responsibility. There's been some studies come out that say upper body strength correlates to how much an individual believes in a hierarchy and in what they call right-wing values, hierarchy, and that there is definite right and wrong and these type of things.
I didn't know what the order of causation would be there, though.
Correlate, I don't think causation, but I do think that for actually, and I don't think causation on the grand scale, but I think on the individual scale, that I've seen it in many men that as they take control of their body. Now, I'm not saying an obsession with physical fitness. I remember you had a great video about that. But it's not the obsession with physical fitness. It's the taking control of your own life.
Yes, okay.
So
the physical fitness is a manifestation of something deeper.
Yes. How do I tell someone to take control of their emotions? They can't see them. But I can tell them to take control of their body.
You can see emotions, I think. You can see the kind of person. I did a book on physiognomy. You can see the kind of personality someone has in their body.
Yes, I'm sure maybe you and I can. The client can't.
Oh, I see.
The client can't, and they can't see their own emotions. Often they can't identify their own emotions. And in the case of women, they'll have 10 or 15 at the same time. But what happens is if you can get them to control their body and start to have mastery over something in their life, then they start to branch out. Now, if you have an older man who's maybe very successful at work but has issues with relationships, for example, you take the control skills he's learned in his professional life, and you start to say, let's move that over now into your relationship life. You know how to control your emotions when you're negotiating with a client. Okay, now use that same strength to control your emotions when you're speaking with a woman, when you're negotiating a relationship with a woman, when you're trying to figure out what she's thinking and to read her. And so these are transferable skills. But what I was saying before is that this is I think the path to reestablishing patriarchy in the West is to teach young men the things that they never got a chance to learn. Being raised in a very feminine society, women complain about the patriarchy. We're in the most effeminate society in history, probably. And they're complaining, the solution to that is to teach men how to be men, teach them the things that they never got a chance to learn. And that is how we're going to not copy from our enemies, it's learning from our ancestors what worked.
The Silicon Valley tech corporations have been rapidly converging and positioning themselves as gatekeepers between you and the content you love. But we have a solution, and the exodus has begun. Join us at rationalrise.tv to break free of the technocratic overlords and enjoy our hundreds of hours of free content. Or better yet, sign up and support us for as little as $5 a month to gain access to talk shows, albums, live concerts, audiobooks, films, documentaries, comedy, literature, education resources, and much more. Because in times of darkness, the greatest weapon is the light. Rational Rise TV, champions of the light.